So when the phrase walking tall is brought up these days, a lot of people instantly have the visual picture of The Rock coming to mind. But I'm really interested of how many people are aware that there was an original movie in the 1970s titled Walking Tall. A movie that was based on a real-life folklore hero, a real-life Tennessee sheriff by the name of Buford Pusser. Now, The Rock's version of the movie was a completely different storyline from the original, but a couple of things did stay the same. Mainly that being just a really big dude carrying a really big stick who did things his way. Buford Pusser has always been looked at as a hero, a one-man army, a legend, if you will. And that was the case up until August of 2025 anyway. As sheriff, Buford Pusser survived 7 different stabbings and up to 8 different shootings. He also offed 2 different people in the line of duty and destroyed over 40 steals on his one-man war against moonshining, coming up against the organizations by the name of the Dixie Mafia and the State Line Mob. There was a man on record that once stated he escaped from prison with his main intention to get payback on Sheriff Buford Hayes Pusser. Pusser was born in small town Tennessee, McNairy County to be exact, on December 12, 1937. His daddy was the police chief of Adamsville, Tennessee, which is an office and title that Buford would grow up to later hold. He was a 6'6" tall high school basketball and football star who would go on to join the U.S. Marine Corps, but his service came to a sudden end during recruit training, being medically discharged due to asthma. When the military didn't work out, he moved from Little Town, Tennessee to the big city of Chicago, where he then became a professional wrestler going by the name of Buford the Bull. On December 5th of 1959, Buford had married his beautiful fiancée, a lady named Miss Pauline, after which they returned home to the great state of Tennessee, back home to Little Town Adamsville. In 1962, Buford became the Adamsville City Police Chief for 2 years, also being the title that his father previously had. In those 2 years, he found that this would be the way for old Buford to make a name for himself. After James Dickey, who was the McNairy County Sheriff at the time, lost his life in a motor vehicle accident, old Buford Pusser found himself being elected and earning the title of McNairy County Sheriff at the age of 26 years old, which made him become the youngest sheriff in Tennessee history, as of 1964 anyway. He had been in law enforcement for only 2 years at that point, and rapidly found himself in such a position that he possibly could do some positive changes in his area. Pusser had seen what the organized crime in those areas had been responsible for, and for some reason decided that he was going to become a one-man army and do everything in his power to eliminate them. These 2 organizations were known as the Dixie Mafia and the State Line Mob. The Dixie Mafia were the bigger of the 2, hailing out of Biloxi, Mississippi, mostly composed of white Southerners, but they had their hand into a lot of different states and a lot of different crime. Now, the State Line Mob were the local gang, the local bad boys that operated in McNairy County, Tennessee. Pusser waged war by himself against the prostitution, moonshining, gambling, and many more shady acts that were being done by these 2 organizations. Pusser had gotten himself so deep into the mix that a lot of people looked at this man as a hero, a one-man wrecking crew who was focused on demolishing the vile side of the South. Unfortunately, during the ongoing skirmishes one early morning around 3 a.m. in 1967, Sheriff Pusser had received an emergency call, which he and his wife both got into the car to respond to. In his words, he and his wife were set up and ambushed on their way to the scene, in which bullets began to fly, and after all the smoke had been settled, he had been hit in the jaw, and his wife Pauline had unfortunately lost her life. Pusser would spend the next 18 days in the hospital, where he would fully recover from his bullet wound. after which he would be billed as a righteous, upstanding lawman. So much so that Hollywood got word of all his doings and decided to make a based on true events movie on this man's life. This movie was the original Walking Tall, which honestly did pretty well at the box office in its time. So much so that when they wanted to do a sequel, they reached out to old Buford Pusser in 1974 and were asking him to play the main role in this upcoming film. Now, weirdly enough, right after old Sheriff Pusser had gotten the call and accepted the role, he got into a life-ending car accident that would leave everyone else telling his story and propping him up as the man they would have you believe he was. Now, for many, many years, the tales of Sheriff Buford Pusser have been told in movies, in stories, and even in songs. Now, as a lot of lawmen do, he did change a lot of people's lives, some for the better and some for the worse. But there is something to be said anytime we build up a mortal human to being nothing but righteous and fair. We as humans are flawed, no two ways about it, and Sheriff Buford was no different. In 2022, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, for multiple reasons, decided to reopen and reinvestigate the whole case involving the ambush and life-ending events of Miss Pauline Pusser. I myself, when hearing this story, was suspicious about the whole event, so I can understand where their minds were to reopen this case. And over the past 3 years, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has uncovered a lot of the story about old Buford that no one has ever seemed to tell. They found information from Pauline's family and others that directly state that Sheriff Pusser had been verbally as well as physically abusive to his wife over the years, which is directly going against all of the buildup of how great and moral Buford Pusser actually was. There has been speculation that he had his hand into the illegal underground rings a little bit more than just acting as sheriff. They also found out a lot more than they could have in 1967 when this horrific event occurred. In 1967, back in those times, there weren't all the different CSI measures that we have now. So at the time, they looked at who they were dealing with, a local sheriff who was at war with the criminal element, and just took his words and statements as the truth of what happened. I'd even go as far to say if you lived in that area at the time, most likely you would have believed the sheriff too. But as of present day, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation could see holes all through the story. So they decided, since we have this case reopened, let's do our due diligence. And while doing so, they started to find the truth. The way that Buford Pusser had described the whole scene and the incident were not matching up with all the knowledge we have these days. With the blood splatter, being able to find the angles of which shots would have been fired from, as well as the distance from which they were fired. In 1967, these were all guesses and speculations. In 2025, we can confidently line up the truth. Now, Buford Pusser's story said that the ambushing car had cut their car off, making them come to a stop where they were commenced to being openly fired at across the vehicle from the side, at a distance, with the passenger side being lined up in the direction of the gunman, which is why Pauline ended up getting hit more times and Buford only being hit in the jaw once. Which, going by that story, makes sense, right? But here's where it starts to get wicked. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation still had access to information regarding that morning. After they had reopened this case, exhumed Pauline's body, and went through all the different information and accounts that they had, they found that Miss Pauline's wounds and blood splatter said a whole different story altogether. Somehow her blood had ended up on the hood of their own car, as well as they could tell from the photographs of Buford's bullet wound that it was not made from distance. They could see that there were stipulated burn marks in and around the entry wound, which means the only way that could happen would be from a very close impact point. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation concluded as of August 2025 that if Buford Pusser were alive today, he would be being charged with his wife Pauline's life being lost. Not just charged for her life being lost, but he would be charged as the person who took the life. Buford the Bull Pusser was no legend. He was no hero, not even a decent lawman. This man was a domestic abuser who was given the power and opportunity to feel like he could do and get away with anything. So much so that he could do it, get away with it, and still have a movie dedicated to his lie-filled life and put it all under the nose of the public and act as if he was the victim. Once again, off the top, we as humans are flawed in one form or another. It seems so fitting that after Pusser decided to take the movie role projecting himself, that he later passed away in a drunk driving accident that very night on August 21st, 1974. It's almost as if Miss Pauline had reached from beyond the grave and eliminated that option. I feel like the guilt and the acknowledgement of this guilt should be just as loud as the praise for this man was. Unfortunately, we live in a whole different time and very few people even know who this man was. But the family of Miss Pauline will never forget. Please be mindful of who we give our praises to. Be aware that we make it possible for these monsters to be built, and always be willing to look a little bit deeper than the surface before we go crowning individuals. Buford Pusser was no hero. He wasn't even any better than the ones he went around arresting and pointing the finger at. It's a shame how many families this man tore apart for nothing, including his own. Rest in peace, Miss Pauline.